I'm just so excited. If you could just imagine this, literally before coming up here, I literally leaped up into the air, jumped up just because I was excited. I was like, yes, we got it, Rachel, we got it. So she gave me this acronym
Yeah,
that organizes the challenges of
yeah,
building conscious beings. And we'll reveal it on your show. This will
man.
be the seed for ripples of influence and
Yeah,
interest. I don't know. We'll see. But
yeah.
I'm pretty excited about it.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensées. I'm your host, Parker Sedecase, and this is a podcast where we explore all the deepest ideas in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I love thinking about cool stuff, so come think with me. Today's episode is very, very special. I have with me for the third time Dr. Josh Rasmussen. This time we're going to be talking about the mind and how to create the mind, but more from an artificial intelligence angle. So I've had him on to discuss his book, Who Are You Really? A Philosopher's Inquiry into the Nature and Origin of Persons. This book is fantastic, and I commend it to all my audience. I had him on once to talk about how to create consciousness at all, how to create like dream characters who are conscious, just the mystery of consciousness and how it's something to be explained whether you're a theist or atheist or whatever you are. And it was a really, really fun episode. So go check that one out. Before that, I had him on to talk about the metaphysics of truth. What is truth? What are propositions? What are facts? Covering his dissertational work. It's awesome. It's really, really fun. He's just such a good metaphysician, and he took a deep dive into consciousness. And so I had him on one more time here. Hopefully of like 100. I hope he comes on just a bunch because he's so good. But this time we talk about consciousness, and I pitch some ideas from artificial intelligence. As many of my audience members will know, I've taken a deep dive or hard fork into AI literature in order to help us all think about it more clearly. So Josh helps me think through how you might go about creating a mind, some philosophical constraints for the AI researchers, why patternist theories of mind aren't it. They're not everything. How computational views of the mind still need a mind, and it looks like it needs an immaterial substance. So Josh defends those claims, and we go in real deep on the nature of consciousness and mind, and how consciousness might emerge and what it might emerge out of. So if you guys like this podcast, please support it. Please support me on Patreon or support me on YouTube members. Um, that would be huge. You can buy merch and all that stuff, but check the description for different ways to support. The two big ones for real are Patreon and YouTube members. I want to do this full time. I want to be a researcher, learn how to say that word too. That would be huge. So please consider becoming a Patreon patron or a YouTube member, and you can get all sorts of exclusive content. I have over like 8 hours of apologetics lessons that I taught at my church, and those are exclusive. I'm never going to make those public. Those are only for paying supporters. So do go and find those. That'd be awesome. And join us on Facebook in the Facebook group Parker's Pensées Penseurs. There should be a link in the description wherever you're getting this at. Maybe not audio. Just find it. It's on Facebook. It's not so bad. All right, that's enough commodification and self-promotion. Let's jump in with Josh Rasmussen for the third time, talking about consciousness and artificial intelligence. All right, Josh, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast, man.
Thank you. I'm just so excited. I was telling Rachel, like, this is one of my most fun things to do. And I brought some of my kids' toys here to help illustrate some of
Oh,
our
I'm so
concepts that
glad. I
we're talking
forgot to
about.
ask you. I'm so
Yeah, I
glad
was
you
like
brought this.
literally, if you could just imagine this, me jumping up and down because I was just so excited when my wife and I came up with this acronym that I was just telling you about before the
Yeah,
show that
yeah,
organizes the challenges of building
yeah,
conscious beings. So
yeah.
thanks for having
Well,
me.
real quick, man. So before you came on last time, let me just plug this book. Who Are You Really? A Philosopher's Inquiry into the Nature and Origin of Persons. I was telling Josh beforehand that this is the philosophy of mind book I think I'm going to give people from now on, because you can actually read it if you're not a philosopher. If you're not a philosopher of mind, you can read it. It's fun. It's like the fun type of like philosophy professor you think of, where it's like, oh, wouldn't this be weird? And like, yeah, that would be weird. But then you actually get really deep in. So it's not just like, we're going to talk about the same stuff everyone talks about. No, we go in deep. So I recommend this. But last time before you came on, you had lunch with your wife Rachel, and she helped you figure out another thing. So then before this time, she helped you figure something out. She's a beast, man. Is she a philosopher like by training or just from
So
being with
she
you or what?
Yeah, she's multi-talented. I think she has this quality to make things beautiful and
Mm,
awesome.
yeah.
So she helps me to but on a conceptual level,
Mm.
as well as a presentation level. So, I mean, I was if you could just imagine this, literally before coming up here, I literally leaped up into the air, jumped up just because I was excited. I was like, "Yes, we got it, Rachel. We got it." So she gave me this, acronym, and we'll reveal it on your show.
Yes,
This will be
man.
the seed for ripples of influence and
Yeah.
interest. I don't know. We'll see. But I'm
Yeah.
pretty excited about it. Yeah.
Oh, me too, man. Well, so let me just give a little quick preview for the folks where we're going so you can stay tuned and keep watching. We're going to talk about consciousness, machine consciousness, and patternism. Patternism is a philosophy of mind that says, like, you're a pattern. You're a pattern of thoughts. You're a pattern of material composition. You are this strange loop. They all say different things, but it's really similar. The overarching theme is that you are a pattern. That's what makes you who you are. And Josh talks about that in the book, and he brings up this problem, this challenge of construction, like how do you construct consciousness, and then that turns into a constraint on theories of mind. Like you have to be able to explain this thing. So then, before we started recording here, Josh was telling me about this acronym that I'm really excited about. So, Josh, why don't you lay out the acronym for us so we can see like
Sure.
where we're going in this combo?
Yeah, great. So, one of the things I'm interested in is this question: how do you construct a conscious being?
Mm,
And this is part of the general question about like, how did I come to be?
yeah,
And this is one of those questions that can just sort of startle you when if you just think about it afresh. It's like, okay, reality includes me.
yeah,
What? How did that happen? Right? And it's one of those things where if you start to investigate how to construct a being like yourself, it doesn't get easier.
mm,
In my experience, and this is a track that many theorists who are working in this field would testify to, it becomes you discover a larger minefield of different problems.
yeah,
And so these problems lead to what I call the construction challenge, which is the challenge of how to construct a being like us. And I wanted an acronym to organize all the different problems that I'm aware of in sort of a simple way. So the acronym is CUP. CUP is the container for all the different problems. And so the C stands for the contents of consciousness. So to produce a being like me, we've got to figure out how to produce the different qualities or contents we find in our own consciousness:
mhm,
thoughts, feelings, intentions, maybe a sense of self or sense of self worth. Uh, having a plan in my mind. What is that? A mental image of dragons that has to be constructed, because those are things that are contents of consciousness that appear to exist. So if we want to construct a conscious being, we have to see how to construct that. And then the second one is U for unities of consciousness. And I think we're going to be talking a bit about this today as we talk about patternism, because a lot of the different discussions about how to produce conscious beings focus in on the C part, the constructing of the qualities of consciousness.
yeah,
There's less discussion, especially in the popular sphere, on the unities of consciousness and even understanding what those are. So we'll talk a bit about that, I'm
yeah,
sure. And then P for the powers of consciousness, the power to form an intention, and then for that intention to make a difference into the world leads to a set of different challenges there. And I would say that all the different theories of consciousness out there on the market, they divide into two broad categories: theories on which the mindless is first. So there's mindless
yeah,
particles, everything else is made out of that. And then theories on which mind is first. So there's some kind of conscious being at the foundation of reality. And then everything else can be explained or unfolded in terms of that.
yeah,
And all the different particular theories can branch out of those two main theories.
mm,
And the reason why I'm interested in those two main theories is because they supply different resources for the cup,
yeah,
for solving the construction challenge or the construction problem.
yeah.
And I would say that if people can just really understand all the different problems within the cup, that's going to equip them, no matter what theory they arrive at. It's going to equip them to fill out their own theory in a way that is really taking into account all the different data and all the different considerations
Yeah.
that people are thinking about today.
Oh man, it's so good. Okay, so I've been thinking a lot about this because of artificial intelligence type stuff, and when I read your book earlier before the last time you came on, it's like, oh man, it's really cool to think about like constructing consciousness and stuff. And then I talk with guys like Ben Goertzel, and it's like, oh no, he's actually trying to construct consciousness. This is literally his program. His life's work is trying to construct consciousness. So it became like more and more relevant, not just a cool thought experiment, but like, oh, there's people trying to do this. So I actually think this could be really helpful, maybe in helping people form their theory of mind, like you said, but
Yeah,
also like, hey, these are some constraints that all of us have to figure out, especially if you're an AI engineer or theorist. Like these are problems that if you could think about them and how you might solve them, you might be able to go and make some consciousness. Maybe not,
absolutely.
but
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah, I'm totally with you.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
If you can understand these sort of conceptual constraints, it can narrow the pathway
yeah,
for where to go in constructing consciousness.
yeah.
Yeah. So it has
Um,
very practical application.
Totally, and I notice even looking at the cup, I noticed that a lot of folks focus on the contents of consciousness, and they look at like knowledge graphs, metagraphs, hypergraphs, where they're linking a bunch of man. I don't even know if you can. I want to use quotation marks when I call it knowledge because I'm not sure that it actually is knowledge, but
Mhm,
it's like it's a knowledge graph, and from this, the thing is supposed to like emerge out through like a it like emerges out of the program, and that would be like the self maybe. They don't use
mhm,
these types of terms, but it's you can see by looking at this acronym that one or two are focused to the neglect of the others, and I think the unity is actually probably the biggest one, where it's like it'll work itself out. If it starts behaving like a conscious being, then it probably just will be. So
mhm.
I think that one's going to be super duper helpful. Um, yeah, how do you want to jump into this, man? Which one do you think
Well,
is a good
yeah,
starting
if
point?
I could just say something that kind of frames kind of how
Yeah,
I'm thinking
please.
about this. What I've noticed is that sometimes people will kind of become quick to say, on this theory, consciousness emerges.
Mhm.
But on this theory over here, consciousness cannot emerge. My own view is that when we're talking about contents of consciousness, like thoughts,
Yeah,
the feeling of love, those things do emerge. Okay. The question isn't whether they emerge,
yeah,
as I see it. The question is, what kind of material allows their emergence? So if we want to build an artificial intelligence system that doesn't just have the functional aspects of spitting out information that's useful to us,
mhm,
but also has a conscious experience of loving what it's doing. Chat GPT not only gives us information, but it experiences from a first person perspective
mm,
joy. Okay,
yeah,
let's say we want to accomplish that. Well, it's possible to make joy because here we have joy. I mean, joy does come from a certain material or something.
yeah,
And I say material in a generic way just to refer to whatever it is,
yeah,
the stuff out of which joy comes. So, but what kind of material can produce that, right? And not any material can do that. For example, I don't think that you can take mental images in your mind and organize them to produce um how do I put this? Joy that is exemplified by those images. So those
mhm.
images are having joy. It's like those images might bring me joy.
Right,
Okay.
right, 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 right.
They might bring me joy, but can the images themselves have their own joy? You say,
Mm,
no, that's a category mistake. The images are the wrong material for joy to emerge from them,
yeah,
or numbers are the wrong material for joy to emerge from them. So there are these conceptual questions that can guide us
yeah,
to look at, okay, what kind of material can help us. And I just want to say this works in tandem, I think, with our empirical sciences. The
mm,
empirical sciences are giving us clues also as to what kind of substances can produce feelings and emotions.
yeah,
It's just that those empirical data points are going to leave open a range of different models. And so sometimes what happens is the conceptual considerations can help
yeah.
further delimit which model that's consistent with the empirical data among the different models is going to best account for the emergence of consciousness.
And that's why we need philosophy, man. I love that. That's so good. Um, you make this helpful distinction actually, I think in our Facebook conversation, through having this distinction is having consciousness, making consciousness, and being conscious, and
Yes.
it's just so helpful. Um, and okay, another thing, I love my AI folks, and a lot of them are new friends, so I don't want to upset them. So you guys know I love you. A lot of them are uber pragmatists, and they're like, look, if it's playing chess, then it's intelligent.
Mhm.
And I'm like, and we need a better term for intelligence for AI than AI. And I'm part of me is like, no, I think AI is the perfect name for it. It's artificial intelligence. It's like
Mhm.
intelligence, but it's not. And you have this constraint. I randomly just found it. The constraint is this: where there are thoughts, there is a mind. And so if you don't think the AI has a mind, then it's hard to say that it's actually intelligent and that there's thoughts, that there are contents of consciousness if there is no consciousness. So again, I think that's like really, really helpful in even just theorizing about AI. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that before we jump in.
Yeah, no, absolutely, because I do think that you could argue in the other direction. You could say it looks like the silicon chips are displaying functional aspects of thoughts.
Yeah.
And maybe we understand thoughts in terms of their functional aspects. And then you say, you know what? You can't have thoughts without a mind.
Yeah.
Thoughts exist in a mind. And in my book, I mean, I give arguments for that. That's not just an assumption I make.
Yeah.
But let's say that you buy those arguments, right? Well, then you could say, well, then this is evidence that these chips, once they have the functional aspects of thoughts, they also have a mind,
Hmm.
right? And before offering some of the challenges, so there are a few things that there are sort of three things that I hope to accomplish.
Yeah.
So first thing, I want to motivate this kind of patternist or functionalist.
Yeah.
Patternism, you could think of that as a form of functionalism, where you can analyze at qualities of consciousness in terms of their functional activities.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, then that could explain how consciousness could sort of arise out of mindless chips, right?
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
mind itself arises out of mindless chips to have consciousness.
Yeah.
And I want to say a little bit to motivate that, because I think that's a very important position um, in the philosophy of mind, and sort of some of the reasons that motivate that. And then I want to offer uh, let's say, some ways in which I actually myself think that I would sort of integrate a functionalism in my own view,
Mm,
and then make
okay.
a distinction to explain where there's an aspect of functionalism that I think is has problems.
Yeah.
Okay, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. So those are like the three things that I want to do,
Yeah.
because I think sometimes if I go too quick to talking about my problems, we're going to skate over some key distinctions that
Yeah.
will explain how functionalism I think is actually very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you do a great job of that too. Even in contrary positions or rival positions, you're saying, here's how I think we can use this, or here's how I think they're getting something right, because they're
Yes.
they're not dumb. They've been, maybe they say some things that intuitively look crazy upon first glance, but you're like, this person wrote a whole book on this. This person wrote the Oxford, whatever on this. They are smart people. They're onto something, but maybe they're not
There's
seeing
real
the same
insight
thing.
there.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Josh, real quick. So it just in my head, the way I'm conceptualizing things, I think of patternism as like a broader scope where it's like you are a pattern, and then it could be like functionalism or role functionalism or realizer functionalism or whatever, analytic or machine function or just different theories. Are in your head, do you think maybe is functionalism broader? How are you
Well,
thinking
maybe,
about the yeah.
yeah, it probably could go either way depending on how broad your notion of
Okay.
function is.
Sure. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, but to me, what the idea here is just that there's a certain state
Mhm.
of stuff, and that state, if it has a particular pattern, where one way that I think about this is in terms of state A to state B to state C, and that
Mhm.
could form a pattern,
Yeah.
and that could also be analyzed in terms of a function. So I'm sort of thinking of these as susceptible to the same broad scale analyses, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have some pieces here to just kind of like illustrate
Love
maybe
this.
what would motivate a sort of patternist view. So the idea here is, like, let's say that these are your building blocks that you're
Mhm.
going to work with, and you want to build a conscious being. And let's get specific. Let's imagine you want to build a being that is intending to imagine a unicorn.
Yeah.
Okay, that's so. And we're going to stipulate that these things individually are mindless,
Mhm.
and they're essentially mindless. So they can't themselves have a mind. They can't be conscious. This can't have a thought. They can't have an intention, can't have an image, nothing
Mhm.
like that.
Yeah.
This same thing, right? So if these are our building blocks, then a question is, how could thoughts, images, intentions arise, right?
Yeah.
And there are different ways that we might answer this. Three broad theories. One theory would be to say they can't arise. It's a kind of a limitivist theory that there are no intentions, or no thoughts, there's no images. They can't arise. A second theory is no, they can arise, and we give a reductive analysis of what
Yeah.
they are.
Mhm.
What a thought is, what an intention is going to be analyzed in terms of known properties of these mindless things, known
Yeah.
properties.
Yeah.
So let's say that one of the known properties is that they have a position in space, and they have a changing of position in space. So they have motion, right? And then we can start to build up more complex properties out of these properties. So let's say this is A and this is B. So A and B are intrinsically mindless, okay? But extrinsically, they have different positions in space, different motions,
Yeah.
okay? And maybe they have motions that end up forming some kind of a pattern. Maybe they end up kind of bumping and coming out, and then bumping and then coming out,
Mhm.
okay? So now we have something that we can describe. Let's call this the bumping pattern,
Yeah.
okay? So now this opens up a theoretical space for a hypothesis, which is, let's say that the intention to think about unicorns, that intention
Mhm.
is reduced to or analyzed in terms of the known properties of these mindless things. Okay. One advantage of this is now we're analyzing something that's known, which is intentions in our own mind, in terms of other things that are known. And so this is great because if we can analyze one thing that's known in terms of other things that are known, we don't have to posit extra things. We don't have to
Yeah.
posit ghosts, immaterial substances,
Yeah.
gods. Stay away from that. That's magical stuff. We don't want to do that
And you
unless we
don't
have
even
good
need new
reason.
emergent laws at a higher level, right? Because we're not there yet.
We're
Yeah.
not there yet. Yeah, because just to say the three views, the eliminativism that eliminates the consciousness, the reductionism, which we're talking about now, so patternism being a form of reductionism, and then third, there's a non-reductive view where, well, there's different versions of it, but if these are our ingredients, the idea is that these things hit each other, they form this pattern, and it's not that the pattern is the intention to
Mhm.
think about unicorns, it's that this pattern on its own makes the intention of
Yeah.
thinking about unicorns, grounds it or explains or produces it in some
Yeah.
way,
Yeah.
right? So those are the three views. And it's important to realize that the patternist view is not an eliminativist view. The patternist view is not a non-reductive view. It's a reductive view.
Yeah.
And it's reducing conscious intentions to certain patterns of mindless bits of
Mhm.
reality,
Yeah.
right? And so I would say that's my understanding of the view, at least one salient formulation of the view, and that one motivation. This isn't the only motivation, but one motivation. I'll give two motivations, which isn't to say there's only two, but one motivation is that it it explains known things in terms of known things,
Yeah.
which is beautiful,
Yeah.
because in general, a theory that explains the known in terms of the known is going to have a higher probability than a theory that's going to posit extra things beyond necessity.
Yeah. And it sounds less ad hoc and just all sorts of theoretical virtues on its side.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, I'm wondering. Okay, so I'm wondering, Josh, if there might be two versions that the patternist could go for. Like the one would be like maybe a hardware view, and this would say like we're going to reduce it down to the hardware bits, and these are maybe the silicon chip or whatever. They have all sorts of crazy chips nowadays. It's wild. Or the software view, where it's like, yeah, maybe it's not. We're not going to reduce it down to the hardware, but at the software level, at the virtual computer level, that's what the thing really is. Do you think that those two can like stand on their own, or maybe do they all reduce back down to the
I think
hardware view? Okay.
they reduce to the same basic idea,
Yeah.
because I mean, if you think about, what is software?
Hmm.
If you have a program that's running on one computer,
Yeah.
and then you run the same program on another computer, what are you doing? You're running the same pattern, the same type. So
Mhm.
just to illustrate this,
I
let's
love
say you've
this.
got these little bits are your bits of hardware,
Mhm.
and they're forming this pattern right here. Okay, that's the pattern. And then, okay, I wish I had different colors, but I'm pulling up two more.
Yeah.
These are different than these.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then let's say that these get destroyed. They're gone. They're replaced now with these different hardware, but same pattern,
Mhm.
same software,
Yeah.
same software.
Yeah.
So I think that, but ultimately that pattern that is the software pattern is a pattern that the hardware has.
Yeah.
The hardware has the software pattern.
Yeah.
The pattern is the software, if that makes sense,
Yeah,
right?
it's so it the analog would be like oh, we mentioned it earlier. Kim's problem of
A
reducing down.
causal
Yeah.
exclusion.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did you see the analog there, or is that stretching?
Yeah, that I want to kind of hold on to that. I want to save
Okay,
that
cool.
one.
Cool, cool,
This will
cool.
be one of the challenges to a pure patternist view.
Yeah.
But before we get to challenges, I want to do some more to motivate it.
Yeah,
I
let's do
want
it.
your audience who are patternist to feel like, oh, okay, yeah, that does seem like what would motivate my view.
Good. That's good.
And this isn't just like a game so that I can make them feel like I understand them, only to now object to them.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, something else I want to do is tell you why I also accept some of the functionalist insight into my own view.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah. So the first kind of motivation is that it allows us to have a simpler view.
Mhm.
So we're explaining known things in terms of known things. Don't have to posit something else. Second, it seems to fit with observations in neuroscience, where you have correlations between brain states,
Yeah.
um, axons firing in certain ways, and thoughts. If you hit your head, it's going to affect your mind. My
Yeah.
daughter Chloe, she got a concussion. She's recovered. She's done very well with that, but it definitely affected her mentality for a while there. She was kind of having to do some things to kind of restore. She would get these extra scary thoughts, and
Oh
so
wow.
we worked through that. But there's definitely like that correlate. Obviously, there's the correlation,
Yeah.
right,
The
between
neurocorrelates of consciousness. Yeah,
that's it.
NCCs. For everyone on the inside, if you can say NCCs, then you're an insider. You're cool. Everyone likes you. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you got it. Neurocorrelates of consciousness. So that's an empirical evidence, and it is evidence because what you have here is correlation. And people sometimes say, "Hey, correlation's not causation." That's like
Right.
a meme or a cliche or something
Yeah.
like this. I actually don't like that kind of response because correlation can be evidence for causation.
Yeah.
But here, the idea is that we're not even talking about causation. We're talking about there's correlation between these things forming a certain pattern and you having a certain thought.
Right.
And so the correlation is evidence of identity, of reduction. What it
Mm-hmm.
is to have that thought is for those things to be in that pattern.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that is evidence, real evidence. It's like if you go out and you see the morning star and then the evening star, and then they have these correlations. You might think that they're different. The morning star is different from the evening star, but you notice these systematic correlations between them about the timing of when they rise, and you do some calculations, and you might say, hey, you know what? We can explain the correlation in terms of it's Venus. It's one thing
Yeah.
that's correlated in
Yeah.
this way.
Yeah.
So that's important, and that is real evidence, I think, for patternism.
Yeah. Okay.
That's
Okay.
a that's a good reason. Like, so if somebody's a patternist and they're like, yeah, it seems to simplify my view, explains known in terms of known. It fits with neuroscience,
Yeah.
um, and that's a reason. I want to say that's a good reason.
Yeah.
That you probably should be a patternist.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. 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 No, that's really good. Um. Yeah. Or is it motivated? Do you think is this?
Well, there's another motivation that I had in my mind, and now it's circling away.
Yeah.
If it comes back, I mean, there are all sorts of different reasons that you might have for reducing consciousness down.
Yeah.
One kind of reason has to do with maybe problems with the alternatives. So
Yeah.
problems with eliminativism, problems. I think this was the third one that actually could be turned around into a challenge for the patternist, but could also be used as an argument for some kind of reduction, and
Yeah.
has been. Philosophers take this route, which has to do with the explanatory completeness of physics.
Yeah.
So the idea is that if these are our particles, and these are the fundamental bits of reality, and they're mindless. Okay, those are some ifs.
Yeah.
But let's say, we have the fundamental particles. We don't have reason to posit something that's not mindless at the base of reality.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not panpsychists, so we sort of have that intuition. These particles are mindless.
Yeah.
And physics sort of tells us how they operate. Then those particles pull the strings on everything.
Yes.
But now you might think, hey, but it seems like my mental life actually makes a difference. Like if I intend to raise my hand, I raise my hand. Or if I intend to imagine unicorns, I just did that right now. I'm not lying to you. I just was intending to imagine unicorns, and I got an imagination of a unicorn going.
Yeah.
How did that work for you? It
It was
looks like
good. It was good. I was making
kind of
sure I
relate to
could
one.
do it. Yeah. I was making
Yeah,
sure.
you have to do, making sure you did it. So you do the experiment. But now this leads to kind of a problem, because if you're able to, through your mind, make a difference into the world, like you can raise your hand, or you can
Mm.
form an intention that actually leads to another mental state of imagining unicorns. See, there's this causal sequence initiated by mental states, right? How is that possible if what really initiates everything are non-mental
Yeah.
particles?
Yeah.
Okay. And it's interesting because Frank Jackson, he sort of cites this kind of argument. I shouldn't say sort of. I mean, he does cite this kind of argument as a reason that later in his career, he ends up reducing mental states to physical states.
Yeah.
The idea here is that if we can say that what it is to have the intention to think about unicorns or to raise your hand just is a certain pattern of particles,
Yep.
then there's no problem saying that one pattern of particles leads to another pattern of particles. This is actually a consequence of what physics would tell us,
Mm-hmm.
that there are certain patterns that lead to other patterns, and our laws of physics tell us how that works.
Yeah.
So basically, what's going on is the mental is a macro level description of huge patterns, huge functions, huge organizations. It's a mental level description of fundamentally mindless things, but the mental level description is really part of the causal chain, just
Yeah.
as like a waterfall is part of the causal chain at the macro level of causing splashes down at the base.
Yeah.
So that
That
would be a third motivation
that
for
that's so
for this.
he when he came on the show, he talked about these patterns of similarity and difference. And to be honest with everyone, like, man, it was really hard for me to understand what he was talking about. But I think it's just starting to click for me, actually, because of what you just said and because of patterns. That I'm gonna have to go back and listen and talk to him again. That's so helpful. I think maybe one more, because now I want to help motivate too.
See, now you're on
Sometimes
board. This it's kind of fun, right? To
that's right. Yeah,
motivate
yeah.
these.
Well, I think one of them that I've heard before is they will acknowledge um, the difficulty of grounding identity over time, on a purely physicalist notion of the self. Because like, no,
Yeah.
your material has changed out. Unless you want to just go in for like the couple neurons that don't change out, then that's really what you are. But no, it seems like you're more than that. So it's the pattern that's still there, even though new material comes in
Right.
and sloughed off. It's still holding this pattern, and yeah, the pattern does change, and that kind of explains why you're a different person now with different desires and motivations than you were before, because the pattern is kind of an ever shifting thing, even though it can survive sloughing off and bringing in different materials.
Oh, I love that. So just to imagine here, we've got these two things. They're going into the bumping pattern,
Yeah.
right? And then let's imagine that like one of these things leaves, but another one sort of comes in and starts bumping.
Yeah.
If you are the bumping pattern, that's what you are,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
you can continue to exist. This is what you're talking about. You can persist from one moment to the next as long as the pattern remains intact. Even
Mhm.
as you lose your particles and new particles come in,
Yeah.
you continue to exist. And so this is a helpful solution to this problem of persistence. How do you persist through changing parts? The answer is you are a pattern that persists through changing parts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful.
And you could also just kind of pulling from the motivations of functionalism, you could say, well, look, we're made of different stuff than the alien. So you just pull in like multiple realizability arguments, and you're like, look, this alien has pain, even though it's a cloud organism or something, and I'm made of carbon. But yeah, as long as that pattern's being realized in that cloud being, then you can ascribe pain states to him, which it looks like he's in pain or something, or if he's telling you he's in pain. if cloud aliens are he's or she's. But you can attribute, yeah, because you can have multiply realized pain states, and we always go with pain. We should probably do joy. You always talk about joy, but it's
Yeah,
always the
joy. Let's
pain
focus
states.
on joy.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Pain.
Um,
Yeah, that's right. The philosophers always talk about C fibers firing and
right.
pain. Right,
That's
yeah.
right. Philosophy is painful, man. I don't know. Um, okay, so we got some motivation, and if new ones come up, we can just keep tossing them in. Um, But I'm with you, and I'm really intrigued, man. I'm really intrigued to see how you're gonna pull it in, because I've thought similar things myself about functionalism, at least, where I'm like, it's kind of cool, man. I kind of like some of this stuff. I don't think it's everything, but I'm interested to see where you're going with it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, so let me say a little bit about, kind of how I would incorporate some kind of pattern or functional aspects into my own view. So first of all, I do think that conscious states, have functional aspects.
Mm,
And a metaphor, I actually got this, but way back when I was at Notre Dame, a student gave me this metaphor when we were talking about functionalism in class,
yeah.
and it just stuck with me. I thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to use this, and I actually use this in the book, when I talk about how you could have something that has function, even if it isn't the same thing as function. So
Oh,
the
right.
example is a key that has a certain shape.
Yeah.
So the shape of the key gives the key a certain function to be able to unlock a door. Because it has that shape, it also has a certain function. Um, and you could even think about this in terms of a pattern as well, that there's a certain pattern of behavior that when you put the key into this door and turn it, the door unlocks.
Yeah.
Okay. But the point here is that the shape of the key is not the same thing as the function of the key. It's that the shape enables or has a function.
Yeah.
And that's just importantly different. I mean, a lot of philosophy of mind involves careful analytical surgery to see, okay, this is different from this, so that we can appreciate, how all the different pieces could possibly go together.
Yeah.
And I want to just right away affirm that I do think that every conscious state has functional aspects. And this is, in fact, why we can witness empirically when we look at brains, functional connections between conscious states and material brain states.
Yeah.
This is one of the reasons, is because the conscious states have functional aspects in the brain. And the
Yeah.
brain also has functional aspects connected to the consciousness. So that's the
Yeah.
first thing. And just leaves aside, okay, is the conscious state itself a function? Well, we have to be careful with our language, because I think it has functional aspects, but that's not the same as saying that it is literally nothing but inputs and outputs,
Yeah.
even if it causes inputs and outputs.
Well, so, yeah, can you gloss the key analogy in terms of if the key was just a function? Like, what would that look like if the key was the function? It didn't just have a functional
So
aspect.
good. Right, right, right. So that would be like if the shape of the key, because I was focused on just an aspect of the key, the shape of the
Yeah,
key.
yeah,
If the shape of the key is the function of the key,
yeah,
and maybe there's different functions, but let's just kind of fill in. Let's say one function is that when the key is, in this state, like poked into the key, a certain keyhole,
yeah,
and then turned, and then the door is pushed, then the door opens.
yeah,
Okay, the shape of the key is, allowing that functional, relationship to
yeah,
open the door.
yeah.
But to say that the shape is the function is to say that here's what that shape is. It is numerically identical to a set
Yes,
of inputs and outputs, that
yes,
in this state, then this happens. In this
yeah,
state, then this happens.
yeah.
So a function is just, you could think of it as an ordered, a set of ordered pairs,
Oh,
inputs and
yeah.
outputs.
I was about to ask that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Is it an event? Is it an event or like a? I always have a hard time with this, and I haven't heard a whole ton, but like a function. The shape of the key has this like potential to function as opening a door when turned a certain way.
Yeah.
But isn't that's like an event that happens, but it's like got this potential to be used in that particular event?
So I think of, good question. I think of the events as the inputs and outputs.
Okay,
So they compose the function. So the
gotcha.
function tells you, um, which events happen given certain input events.
Okay, okay. I
And so you could, or or states. I mean, we can talk about
was gonna ask about
states,
states of
events.
affairs. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we can get deep into the metaphysical, distinctions here. But roughly, a function is just a set of ordered pairs of
Okay,
inputs and outputs. And then there's a further question: what are the elements of those pairs? But I think you can say events are the elements of those pairs.
Okay.
And so here, I mean, I would say that you can see by insight into shape
Hmm.
and insight into a function of ordered pairs
Yeah.
that the shape of a key is not the same thing as the or set of ordered pairs.
Yeah.
Those are
Right.
distinct.
Yeah. 100%. And it's so obvious because the function, the set of ordered pairs, needs to have the key in it, but the key isn't the whole thing, and that
Right.
thing isn't like a material. I don't know. That's why we get into the metaphysics of it, and that's why I could see someone saying this is pedantic, but it's like, well, events to me aren't physical things. Maybe they incorporate physical things, right? But the event is like a happening. It's something like it's hard to even express, but it's not
I
the
know
same
what you
thing.
mean. And even if you call it physical, because it has physical
Right.
contents, physical event, the point is that an event that includes the key in a certain state is not the same thing as the
Right.
shape of the key.
Right. Right. That's good, man.
And again, the event is just one element of an ordered
Yeah.
pair, and the function is all the set of all the ordered pairs.
Yeah.
So the function, usually the way the philosophers talk about this is the functional aspects are complex. And so one of the kind of arguments actually against functionalism, a strict functionalism.
Yeah.
So Jaegwon Kim in his book Physicalism or Something Near Enough, he makes this argument for the near enough. The near enough part is the part where he says there are qualitative aspects of consciousness. The feeling of thinking about giraffes
Yeah.
is different from the functional, the ordered pairs aspect
Mhm.
of thinking about the functional impact of that thought. So Kim makes that argument, and he says the qualitative aspect of consciousness is included in functions, let's say, but not the same thing
Yeah.
as functions.
Yeah.
And one of his arguments for that is that the function itself, and this takes that sort of analytical surgery, you have to kind of like focus in on okay, a function is ordered pairs, a set of ordered pairs. That's complex in a way that a quality of intending something or quality of feeling love, or even let's go back to the key analogy,
Yeah.
the shape of the key
Yeah.
is not complex in that same way.
Yeah.
And the idea is that you can sort of see this by awareness of the items in question, a kind of direct awareness. So we're not in an opaque context where we're guessing like, well, for all we know, it could be like water and H2O. Well, it's because we don't have that direct conscious access to the molecular structure.
Yeah.
We're aware of its effects and how we experience it. But when it comes to consciousness, that's where we have arguably the direct conscious access to at least some
Yeah.
aspects of consciousness.
I don't want to jump the gun, but it seems like the unity problem's right here in the same vicinity where it's like, no, these things are complex. These are these sets are complex where like the consciousness seems simple, or do you not go for that?
Well, maybe not as complex as the function. So
Yeah.
I want to come to the unity aspect because you're right. That's we're gonna talk about how there is a deep unity problem that I think functionalism on its own isn't going to solve.
Okay.
But even before we look at that,
Yeah.
I almost just kind of want to highlight a more fundamental idea that Jaegwon Kim was highlighting, which is more in the C category of the contents of consciousness.
Yeah.
How do you
Yeah.
get the contents of consciousness? And the idea here is that we want to distinguish between different aspects of reality. Okay, so I think it's just for me, it's helpful to have the examples here. So if this thing's forming that pattern of going back and forth like this, okay, I think that we can see by insight into the pattern and insight into the color of these things that the pattern is not the same as the color.
Yeah.
Even if the color plays a functional role, even if the color is causing the pattern, even if the pattern is somehow causing the color to
Mm.
appear to us, but we can see that the color and the pattern aren't the same thing.
Yeah.
And Kim is going to say the same thing about certain qualitative aspects of consciousness that we can sort of see by direct conscious awareness of images of dragons,
Yeah.
feeling love. And it's helpful to use examples so it's not just abstract. And you got to do the work, like focus on that image.
Yeah.
Is there any qualitative aspect of the image that's different from a pattern
Mm.
that you can tell a difference? And so what many philosophers say, okay, there appears to be a difference, Papineau talks about the intuition of distinction,
Yeah.
the appearance that there's a difference. But before we identify the appearance of a difference, it's just so important to like take the time and focus in on some of these distinctions so you can even appreciate that, hey, you know what? Maybe there's a way in which a certain understanding of knowledge is purely functional.
Hmm.
Okay. Maybe we could stipulate that knowledge, according to this understanding, is the way the parts move together in certain informationally productive ways.
Yeah.
Um, but even after having granted that, and I'm happy to grant that because to me that's just a matter of semantics, that there is a notion of knowledge that Chat GPT has
Okay.
knowledge, has information.
Okay.
But that's going to leave out another, let's say, qualitative, consciousness infused notion of knowledge that I think that I have access to in first person conscious awareness.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so this would be my kind of first of several different sort of challenges to a purely patternist or functionalist account,
Yeah.
which is that I guess I agree with Jaguan Kim that the function leaves out these qualitative aspects of consciousness that I think we can be aware of from a first person perspective.
Yeah. Okay. A real quick. Okay. So for everyone listening, I forgot about you guys. Josh's been using things that look like plastic tacks, maybe from like tic tac toe, and they're yellow. So just picture that. If you need to go back and listen, when he's talking about that, that's what's going on. It's really actually super helpful. So maybe you want to watch. But I'm thinking.
And I've been moving them together to form this pattern,
Right.
right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they
Go
kind
ahead.
of
Go
bounce
ahead.
off each other. Super good. It's
Yeah.
actually kind of hypnotizing. So I'm wondering. So yeah, we got this direct awareness of our consciousness, and we have this distinction that we can make. I wonder if someone would make that um, a similar claim, and maybe the problem with this claim is that it's third person, not first person. But saying right now I'm looking at you on the screen, and that's like the software going on. But I know that it's reducible to the hardware of my computer or something. And so, if that's reducible to the hardware, like we said earlier, then why can't the picture that I'm imagining of a dragon be reducible to the pattern of neurons or something firing?
Yeah. Good. So here it's helpful to distinguish between being reducible to and being based on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
That's good.
So going back, and I guess not everybody can see this, but it's just so helpful for me to use the hypnotizing
Mhm.
examples I have here with these little bits of reality that are just in this pattern of going back and forth,
Mhm.
back and forth, back and forth. And the reason why the pattern is not reducible to the hardware or the parts is for the reason that Parker that you mentioned
Yeah.
earlier to solve the problem of persistence. So it can lose a part
Right.
and then swap out and get a new part and have the same pattern, the same software.
Mhm.
And so the idea here is that there's not a reduction in terms of identity. It's rather what's going on is that the pattern is based on the hardware.
Gotcha.
Okay, it's based on it. The hardware is what's caught up in the pattern.
Mhm.
And here I'm not challenging that. So I hope that it's clear
Yeah.
that what I'm challenging by my first argument is that the conscious experience is itself the pattern.
Yeah.
So I'm not challenging the idea that software depends on hardware. And if somebody says, well, maybe the consciousness is not the same as a pattern, it's not even the same as software in that sense, but it still depends on the hardware of
Mhm.
the brain, let's say. Um, then that's going to be a different view. And everything that I'm saying so far is actually consistent with that
Okay.
because, like, ultimately, I want to say that yes, your consciousness does depend on hardware,
Hmm.
right? Because Parker, my,
Oh,
my
yeah.
view is that the hardware that gives rise to your consciousness is what I call a conscious
Right,
substance.
dude. That was
The
so
kind of
good.
being, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's the kind of being that can produce thoughts and feelings and these sorts of things. It's the kind of being that you and I are.
Yeah.
But here, just to kind of slow us down and focus in just on functionalism or patternism, the idea, this kind of reductive idea, the first challenge that I'm raising is that I think there's a qualitative aspect of
Mhm.
consciousness that we can be aware of. And it really does help to focus on the examples of the aboutness of thoughts,
Yeah.
the not a functional aboutness, but the aboutness when you're thinking about zebras and you focus in on that aboutness in your mind
Mhm.
and you consider what that property is. Um, the structure of the thought about zebras, that thought has a structure, like zebras exist. has a certain structural relationship between the concept of zebra, the concept of existence, and those go together. Um, the feeling of thinking about that, the consciousness of that. Okay, these are qualitative aspects. I call these bits of first person data.
Yeah, I love
So
that.
these are bits of data that you get from first person awareness.
Mhm.
And the idea is that first, that these are real. If we're not eliminativists, we could go back and revisit eliminativism. And some philosophers do. I mean, some philosophers, their journey, as they would report it, is once they get a certain far into philosophy of mind, they go from reduction to let's eliminate it.
Yeah.
Because the idea is that, well, you can't really reduce the qualitative aspects of consciousness to non-qualitative, quantitative aspects of just spatial things in the brain, like shape, motion, velocity, these sorts of things.
Yeah.
Um, so if you can't reduce it, then maybe the qualitative aspects are more like illusions. They're not really there.
Yeah. I love
And
that in the book, Josh, that you talk about eliminativists. They actually do take this stuff serious. They actually do take qualia seriously, and so seriously they don't think it's there. And I'd never thought of that because I always thought like eliminatives, that's my bad guys. We're gonna hammer them. And you're like, no, they take it seriously in a different way than the eliminative the
the reduction,
reductionists. And
yes.
here's why they might seem like they're together, and here's where they do agree, but they disagree pretty strongly as well. I thought that was so cool. Yeah.
Well, it is cool because to me, it's fun. It's interesting because I think the eliminativists have a certain insight. One of the things that eliminativists say who eliminate consciousness, okay, there's different forms of elimination.
Hmm.
You could eliminate thoughts, but let's just say for now, sort of the experiential quality of awareness.
Yeah.
Okay, and so you could eliminate that. You could say it doesn't exist. Well, one thing that motivates eliminativism for some eliminativists is that our folk ontology, our common way of thinking about ourselves, isn't actually true. So we sort of commonly think of ourselves as having feelings and pains, um, and having intentions and having consciousness, but that's not actually true.
Mm.
Okay, but it's interesting because I think what the eliminativists also recognize is that our common way of thinking about feelings and pains and consciousness is going to include these qualitative aspects. And there the eliminativists are saying, okay, let's accept that. Let's say that the common folk way of characterizing consciousness is a correct way of characterizing consciousness if it were to
Right.
exist. So they're taking that very seriously. And then they're saying, but we don't find anything like that just from analyzing functions of brain parts.
Yeah.
And so that's where they would eliminate it.
Yeah. That's so good. Yeah. Okay. I lost where we're at though in the
So
logical
here's
progression.
where we're at. Okay,
Yeah.
so big picture. So we offered 3 or 4 motivations
Yeah.
for functionalism, and those are good motivations. And if people are watching this are functionalists or patternists for those reasons, totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Second, I actually think consciousness has functional aspects, and I think that this is important to understand how the neurocorrelates of consciousness connect.
Hmm.
And now, third, we're looking at arguments against a purely functionalist analysis. So I say there's more to consciousness than function. And I have a set of different challenges. And the first challenge is a challenge from what we might call the sort of qualitative aspects
Hmm.
of consciousness that I think we can be directly aware of.
Yeah.
And what I want to just say at this point is that now there's a debate over whether um, this intuition about the qualitative aspects of consciousness applies to reality.
Hmm.
And even if we're not eliminativists, okay, we could, as Papineau suggests, say that this sort of intuition of distinction is it's misleading in the way that maybe Lois Lane gets sort of tricked into thinking that Clark Kent is different from Superman.
Yeah.
She sees these different modes of the one guy, and she gets misled to thinking that there are two guys there. It's just two different modes.
Hmm.
So there's a sort of avenue of debate and exploration about the idea that, well, maybe what's going on here is that there's actually two different sort of modes or ways of accessing the same reality,
Hmm.
which is a pattern. So there's a first person way of accessing myself, my consciousness, my thoughts, my images. And then there's a sort of scientific third person way of accessing the same reality.
Hmm.
And then what we discover is that it's a function or it's a pattern.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a way of kind of responding to that first kind of challenge to the functionalist.
Yeah. Okay. Um, I probably should have asked this sooner. I want to just toss it in really quick, but some people make a distinction between like functionalism and maybe like computationalism, and they'll say like, well, and especially the AI folks and the mathy folks and the physics folks, they'll say, and this is why I think patternism is this broad thing that can capture all of these. But they'll say like you're a computation, and I say like, well, is the self a computation? And they'll say, yeah, the self is just a computation. I say, well, is it like grounded in the brain or rooted or supervenient in the brain? They go, yeah. I go, is the brain a computation? And they go, yeah. And they just say like it's computation all the way down.
Some have suggested that to me. Yeah, not
Yeah,
everybody does.
yeah, right. And so I'm thinking that this applies like if in critiquing and affirming some stuff about patternism, I think it equally applies to like a computational theory of mind that because that seems like a computation seems like an event as well, right? Or a dyad, or I forgot what the terminology we used.
Yeah, I'm thinking of broadly relational theories
Yeah,
where you have nodes in relations to each other.
yeah,
And so, when I talk about functions, I talk about an ordered set of pairs.
ordered set of pairs.
But you could have a function that, sorry, a set of ordered pairs is what I meant to say there.
Okay.
A set of inputs and outputs. But you could have more nodes.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be
You
pairs, right? Yeah, it could be.
exactly.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so you could get more complex nesting of nodes and relations.
Right. But it's
So
easy to
like
think
in the
about pairs. Yeah, it's like the if it
yeah.
applies to pairs, it applies to all the others, dyads and triads and quadrads and
Yeah, these ideas, yeah, absolutely apply across the board because if you have a qualitative aspect of consciousness that's not reduced to ordered pairs for the same reason, it's not reduced to three things and nodes together.
yeah. Josh,
Um,
that's like a that's a fascinating point to say like, hey, look, if this applies here, it applies everywhere. But it kind of also brings out your point about the construction problem where it's like, well, yeah, that's too simple because two is too simple. And you're like, well, how about three? No, that's too simple. What about 28? And you're like, maybe. And like, no, 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 no. It's the same exact thing, just more of it. But it doesn't look like if it's not going to create a qualitative consciousness here, I need to know why it's going to work when you add 200 of them bouncing together in a pattern, and
yeah,
it's I
right,
think
right,
that's a
right.
good
Yeah,
point. Yeah.
if you have one object that is a mindless bit, and you can imagine it's colorless as well,
Hmm.
and this object is not, I don't know, an image of dragons or something, a
Hmm.
mental image like in your dream, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Then, is two of them a mental image?
Yeah.
Is three of them a mental image? Maybe you could organize them into the form of a dragon,
Hmm.
right? But is it the same thing as a mental image? Now, it's interesting because if there's a point at which you say it is the same thing as a mental image, and if the mental image is real, and if you have access to the intrinsic qualities of that mental image, then I'm actually kind of happy with that because that's completely consistent with the mind first view. As
Hmm.
long as you understand that you're analy- you're analyzing the mindless bits as themselves comprising a mental thing that's actually real.
Yeah.
And so as long as the mental thing is real, and we'll come back to the powers issue that the mental can actually make a difference, so it's not a puppet of the mindless,
Yeah.
then I'm happy with that. I mean, this is where I think people could come together. I was thinking about this today again. I think people, when they mark out their positions, can sometimes quickly polarize because they're defending their positions.
Yeah.
But I actually do believe that like every position has some insight, and there's a way of integrating the different positions together. So we have functional aspects.
Hmm.
That's right. There are also qualitative aspects. That's also part of reality. Those go together. Um, there's a difference between the substratum, the stuff, or the hardware, if you want to use that language,
Yeah.
and then the states of the hardware.
Yeah.
That's good. I accept that, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then just to understand that all those things go together. And what I want to just add here is that one of the problems with a purely patternist or functionalist or computational view is this problem of how you can account for you being you when there's differences in parts coming in and out.
Mhm.
So, and I want to just draw this out because earlier we talked about how the patternist can actually solve that problem by saying, hey, you're the same pattern even if we have different parts. But what happens if your old parts that were replaced get arranged into the same pattern?
Yeah.
What happens then? And we have to think about this. This is where the analytical surgery comes in, because if you're going to say that you are the pattern, that's what you are. You're the pattern,
Mhm.
then you exist wherever that pattern exists.
Right. Right.
Now, if you say that you're the parts, then we have a different puzzle,
Uh-huh.
because how do you maintain your identity and your existence as new parts come in and out? If the solution to the parts problem is the pattern solution, you are the pattern, well, then you have to stay committed to that. You have to, we can't give up that view once we realize that, hey, the same pattern can exist with your original parts that were swapped out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it looks like this is going to lead to a problem because, Parker, if my parts go into your body and your parts go into my body, and I'm talking the atomic parts slowly, one by
Yeah,
one,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Take some time for this to happen. Let's imagine that all of them swap out. And I still have the first person perspective of being me. Now, at this point, somebody might say, well, that's an illusion. There is no you. Okay. But the patternist who's reductionist is not eliminating me. They're
Right.
saying what I am is a pattern, right?
Mhm,
So I'm going
mhm.
to play with that. So then if my parts, my atomic parts go into your body and yours go into mine, and then let's say that I over here, my first person self over here, um, maintain, I'm just sitting over here, just happy. Meanwhile, you start changing your form. You're wanting to imitate me more and more, and and you cut your hair the same way and everything, and molecule for molecule, maybe some machines help with this.
Yeah.
Get those atoms arranged so now you look just like me. Okay, you have the same pattern particles.
Yeah.
But from a first person vantage point, I'm not over there. I'm still over here. I'm still me over here.
Yeah.
The individual me is over here.
Yeah.
And so this is where just the conceptual stuff matters so much, because there's a difference, I would say, between the being that has the pattern,
Yes.
the being that has the shape, the being that has the body, the being that has the neurons, and the pattern itself.
Mhm,
So, that's where I would say that, what I am is something that continues to be me,
mhm.
even as my parts swap out. And even if they take the same pattern multiplied over 10 times. So I've got 10 twins.
Yeah, so okay, I love that because, I've been asking I always ask this question of theories of mind, in the philosophy of mind, about 3D printing someone. If you could 3D print you, um your physical composition, would that be you or not? And if it would be you, then there's two yous, and I think that's kind of a problem. I think that's a cost of the theory. And I asked William Hasker about this. If we 3D printed him, would the same emergent mind emerge with the same memories? And he laughed and he said, "Yeah." And I was like, "Well, that seems like that might be a cost to me." If you're Douglas Hofstadter, strange, literally, his book is "I Am a Strange Loop," and for a long time, it's been sitting underneath your book, so it's like, who are you really? I am a strange loop, and
Okay,
it's pretty
nice.
wild. But the same thing, it's like that pattern. That seems like such a hard problem because it's not just saying you have a clone that is a different. It's actually you. You are multiply realizable because you
That's right.
are
It's not
this
just a
pattern.
duplicate.
Right.
It's the same individual. So was Hasker saying that it would be the same token
No,
individual?
he said it would have all the same memories and everything like him,
Okay.
and we didn't get
Yeah.
into whether or not the causal history would have impacted whether those are true or false beliefs and stuff. It was just
Okay.
kind of a funny thing to say, but I had a problem with the memories. I was like, man, I don't know if it would have the same memories as you. Um, but yeah, that was good times. I don't think he would, and I don't know if he would say that because of like hexaides or something. I don't think you have to use that word probably if you go in for a conscious substance. It's just kind of this is a different substance than that one, even if it has the same pattern. Would you say
Yeah.
that, or would you use the word hexaide?
I don't need a hexaity to
Okay,
account for distinction.
okay,
I think of it as well. I'm actually still kind of sorting my thoughts on this
okay,
anew, but the view that I've had, and maybe I still have this, is just that there's a primitive distinction between token substances.
okay.
Um,
Nice.
yeah, it may be primitive, but still the distinction requires some causal work to create the distinction. But It's being
Oh, okay.
distinct is not grounded in I'm thinking through this, so there's some options on the table
Yeah.
here
Yeah.
for me. But the point is that I am me and I'm not you.
Yeah.
Even if my pattern of particles is the same as your pattern of particles.
Yeah. And that
So
goes
yeah,
for uploading too, right? 'Cause, we're doing all the techno philosophy stuff, but a lot of these folks are like, "This is gonna be great once the technological singularity happens, the AGI, the artificial general intelligence will help us upload our consciousness into a digital world." But when I think of that, I think of a continuation of my experience, and they don't think of that, or if they do think of that, they think, "No, it's not, but it's still your pattern, so it's still like I'm talking to you." And I'm like, "Is if you slip in a like in on me, then that's not me anymore. It's like you're talking to me, but that's not me. It's not my conscious it's not like my soul is attached now to the hardware. It's just a mimicry or something." That's scary.
yeah, I know. I mean, if somebody takes some atoms and assembles them to look just like me,
Yeah.
and then those atoms start saying, "Hey, I'm actually conscious," and let's say that they really are conscious.
Yeah.
Okay, so we solve the hard problem of consciousness. Those atoms really are conscious. But I'm not sort of tempted to think that like they are me,
Right.
like the individual me,
Yeah.
not the duplicate
Yeah.
type, the same type. Our language sometimes fails us here, but we have to just clarify that there's a difference between the being the same in type and being the same token individual.
Yeah.
And my argument, I mean, I try to argue for everything, right? My arguments are ultimately based on, I think, observations that are based in just awareness. So I take myself to be able to be aware of myself having thoughts and feelings.
Mhm.
And so if I'm aware of myself having certain thoughts and feelings, and I'm not aware of your thoughts and feelings, then you're not me.
Yeah.
Okay. Even if you have the same pattern, you have the same function, you have the same um, computation. Um,
Y
and I do think that maybe playing with the AI and the technology, there are ways in which we could extend our lives and extend our consciousness and upload ourselves in some way. But I just want to say that on a mind first theory, this becomes possible only because there's already a
Right.
conscious being
Right.
that is sustained in various forms.
Yeah.
But my problem is if you start with the fundamentally mindless units of reality, mindless circles or particles or whatever, and then you try to organize them into a certain pattern, and then the pattern all by itself is the consciousness. Well, then I think we're going to have this particular problem of replacing our parts out, and then
Yeah.
but being distinct beings.
Yeah, so I should say, even though we may not touch on this, later in the book, you mentioned these arrows that point to who you are, and this might help with with. Okay, I'm gonna use some jargon real quick. So Josh is like a token instance of human nature, and then if there's a bunch of him and we reproduce his pattern everywhere, those would be uh, he would be a type now, and those would be different token instances of the type, which is Josh, which is the original, which is a token. So that probably doesn't help anyone. But there's these arrows that you talk about. The arrow of your oneness points to you as an individual. The arrow of your first person perspective points to you as a center point of consciousness, and the arrow
Yep.
of your self awareness points to you as a self. So we may not be able to touch on all of those, but I do commend the book. Go read those, and that might help explain why if we reproduce a bunch of token instances of the type Josh, why Josh might not have first person awareness uh, or or access to all those different Joshes running around, and he doesn't have this meshed up weird conscious experience.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. And those arrows they point to the unity
Yes.
of consciousness.
Yeah.
So going back to the cup, we have the contents of consciousness, so the first argument then was that there are contents, qualitative contents of
Yeah.
consciousness that aren't themselves functional. So, there's a debate about that, but that's one of the arguments. The second argument is from the unity of consciousness. And I want to elaborate a little bit about
Yeah.
this. And then hopefully, if we have time, we can talk about the P, which is the power of consciousness,
Yeah.
because I think all three of those, the contents, the unity, and the power of consciousness, each bring its own kind of challenge to a purely patternist and functionalist account
Okay.
of myself.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so just to elaborate then on the unity of consciousness, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about how I can be me over here, even after I lose particles. Because the reason for this is that it's not just that I am a bunch of particles.
Yeah.
It's that there's a unification to my reality.
Mhm.
And I really want to illustrate this because this could become so clear. And I think that the problem of constructing unities may be one of the most, if not the most challenging problems in constructing consciousness
Yeah.
that is relatively unknown because people focus on the hard problem of constructing consciousness. And then they feel like if we can solve that, then it's just a matter of
Right.
getting it all functionally related.
Right.
It's like, no. I have a whole chapter on this, and the chapter talks about how functional integration is not enough
Right.
to give us unity. So I want to just elaborate on this. So let's imagine that not all of your audience can see these things, those who are listening,
Yeah.
but I have three little bits of reality, these orange crosses, and let's say that each one represents a conscious chip. So the scientists have been working on building a conscious being,
Mhm.
and they want to build a conscious being that's like you and I, who can have imagination, feeling, and thinking all in a unified conscious experience.
Yeah.
So they divide their task into three task groups. So one task group works on the imagination chip. So their goal is to take some chips, put them together into a big chip that literally has the imagination of purple dragons.
Mm.
That's what they want to do. And so they do this by studying human brains when humans are reporting that they're imagining purple dragons. It's not that they see the images in the human brains,
Right.
that the humans report that. They show the images on the screen from their brain activity, and then they say, does that match what you're thinking in your mind? And the human says, yes. So um, what the team does is they say, okay, so given this function of atoms in this chip, probably this chip is actually having literal images of dragons in its mind.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
And let's just stipulate that they succeeded. Okay. So we're granting that they succeed. They made the imagination chip. They've solved that hard problem of producing the consciousness.
Yeah.
They did that. Then you have the team that made the intention chip. That's the chip that intends to think about dragons.
Yeah.
Okay. So it intends. It doesn't have image capacity. It can't have the images, but it can do the intentions. Okay, so they do that, and then the third one is the feeling of joy. Okay, not pain, but joy. Okay,
That's
so
good.
so now their team leader's like, okay, you guys have done really well. We have these three chips now. So we have the image of purple dragons in this chip, and we have the intending to think of purple dragons in this other chip, and then the feeling of joy, this joyful chip. Okay, but now there are two unities
Mhm.
of consciousness that we can observe, experience within ourselves. There's what I call perspectival unity, which is the unity of different contents of consciousness within a single perspective.
Okay.
So I can have, in my own conscious perspective, I can have both an intention to form the purple dragons as well as an image of purple dragons. Maybe once the image is there, I'm no longer intending it, right? Because it's already there.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
but you know what I'm saying. I can have a thought, an intention, an image, and a feeling of joy all in one conscious experience.
Yeah.
That's perspectival unity.
Mhm.
Okay. And I would argue that we can know this not by looking at brains, of course. First and foremost, we know this by experiencing ourselves having perspectives.
This,
Um,
Josh, real quick. So
yes.
this is like the good type of experimental philosophy. Some people really hate like experimental philosophy and going out and asking people about their intuitions and stuff. But this is actually like treating your mind, which is like a realm of consciousness, as an experimental field, and you're like doing it. And yeah, there's like thought experiments, but the cool thing about thought experiments is you don't have to go out in the world and do them, but you are like in this conscious realm doing these things. So I just wanted to acknowledge like
That's it.
that's so fun, man. This
Yeah.
is like experimenting with your own mind. It's cool.
Yeah. You can do this at home.
Yeah, yeah, that's
And
right.
you can do your own experiments. Don't take my word for it. I always tell people, don't take my word for it. Don't believe anything I tell you just
Yeah.
because I tell you.
Right, right.
Go check it for yourself. See if it makes sense. Do you have a perspective?
Yeah.
Is there something that it's like for you to have a feeling and a thought at the same
Mm,
time in a unified perspective?
yeah.
So that's perspectival unity.
Yeah.
Another kind of unity is what I call subject unity. And this is the unification of multiple perspectives into one subject.
Mm,
So, for example, maybe this morning I'm having the experience of hanging out with my wife, Rachel. Right now I'm having the experience, a complete experience of hanging out with you,
Yeah.
Parker. And these are two different um, experiences. And both experiences involve a perspective that I would have. But what unifies those two perspectives is belonging to me.
Hmm.
Because the experience of hanging out with my wife, that's not the experience that you had.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm talking about my wife, right?
Yeah.
So you didn't have that experience. Um, so there's something that's unifying those two experiences together into one being. And my answer to the question is that I unify them as a subject. So there's two unities here. There's my perspective that unifies different contents of consciousness.
Yeah.
And then there's the subject itself that unifies different perspectives or states of consciousness.
Yeah.
Okay? Does that make
It
sense? So
makes
we're still
yeah.
making the observations to collect our understanding.
I just
Yeah.
think that this is so important, and like you said, analytic philosophy, getting clear on things. This is like a really actual helpful way. Sometimes it's actually not clear, but this is so helpful because a lot of folks in this realm will talk about like Marvin Minsky's Society of Minds, and maybe that's how artificial general intelligence comes about. From all, it's an emergent thing that comes from all these different societies, or the society of different AIs, and one thing to be looking for if you go in on that view is like perspectival unity. Like if it's going to be a conscious thing, like what unifies the perspective, especially if you have different AIs doing different tasks. If this one is
Right.
the intending one or whatever, if each one of
Yes.
those is meant to be that, you need to have this unity, and sometimes it's called the binding problem
Yes.
in neuroscience and stuff, but it's moved over into cognitive science and AI, and it's so close to like the unity of consciousness or unity of phenomenal consciousness, but that it's unity, it's a really hard thing. And then the subject unity, um I really like that. Yeah, I think I have a looser grasp on it, and I've studied this one a lot, and I sometimes I just lose it, but it's like what there's these experiences. What unifies the experiences is you. So you had this experience with your
Yes.
wife. You had this experience with me. How are those?
Yes.
Like unified. What? How do we relate those? Well, they're related because of Josh, because of the thing that you are, who has
Yes.
experienced them.
Yes.
Cool. So it kind of seems like an
That's right.
internal and external unity. Like there's the internal unity, I would say, would be like the perspectival one, with like you are a unified thing and you have these different powers. I don't want to like step onto the powers of consciousness thing, but you do have powers and they are unified in you. And
Yeah.
because that
Yeah.
thing's unified, that also unifies the external experiences that happen to you. And that's how we can even like sort them, that they happen to this thing, Josh. I don't know if that is helpful at all.
Yeah, I sort of think of them both as internal in the following sense. I think of myself as having internal access to a complete
Mm.
unified perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but then my complete unified perspective can change from moment to moment.
Yeah.
And then I think that I have internal access not just to the complete perspectives, but to the me having those complete
Mm-hmm.
perspectives.
Dang, that's cool.
And I think that internal access is actually really important because I think that if we only think of these things from an external standpoint where we're positing an object to explain the unity,
Uh-huh.
then we don't really understand the nature of the unity. And I think that when I read some of these accounts in the neuroscience, like the global workspace theory,
Yeah.
for example, um, it looks like they are providing a very helpful functionalist, maybe externalist set of parameters that draw a circle around what the thing is that's unified without giving us that internal
Yes.
first person knowledge of
Yeah.
it as it
Yeah.
is, if that makes
That makes a
sense.
lot of
The thing
sense.
that it is.
Yeah.
Because again, this goes back to the idea that there can be something that has a function, even if it isn't the same thing as the function. So I actually think that the conscious awareness is a field of
Mhm.
awareness that has functional um, relations to things, but it's not itself a function, and it's what binds the different contents within it.
Yeah.
So this is why, because I just wanted to go back to the team that's building the conscious being, and they're saying that the imagination, the intention, and the feeling, they need to be able to go together into a single being. How are we going to do that? And what I want to say is we recognize these things in a unified experience by recognizing our own
Yeah.
awareness. We're aware of our own awareness. That's what it takes, really, to see the unity. You become consciously aware of your own conscious awareness, which is itself binding together the thoughts, the images, and the intentions, and the feelings, and all those things. But if you don't have that, if you don't have that field of awareness, then I think that this team is sort of stuck, because now what they can do is they can put the imagination of the dragons next to the intention to think about the dragons, next to the joyful chip. They can put them all together. They can have them causally interacting. They can have them forming patterns, any patterns you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
None of that is going to be the same thing as the conscious awareness that binds those together. Instead, what you have is a problem of too many people, Parker. You have too many beings.
Right.
You do, because
Right.
each one has its own perspective.
Yeah.
If it takes a mind to have a thought, then that mind gives a perspective to the thing that's having the thought.
Mhm.
So what that means is that the chip that has that thought is a little thinker.
Mhm.
And then the chip that's having the feeling is a little feeler. And the chip that's having the imagination is a little imager.
Yeah.
So you have three beings there.
Yeah.
Plus, you're supposed to have this fourth being that unifies all of them. But you're not going to get that unification merely by stacking the
Right.
chips or getting them functionally integrated if the unifier is conscious awareness
Yeah.
itself, which is a qualitative, non-functional reality.
Yeah. So sometimes in dealing with or in discussing panpsychism, people will talk about the combination problem. Like if there's all these little
Yeah.
things are conscious, all these little BBs or waves or particles, whatever, then like how is there this unified subject? And the unity problems are amazing. I love them so much. But I think it becomes even more obvious here because each one of these, like maybe call them neuromorphic chips or something. That's what they do in the literature. Each one of these neuromorphic chips has a different role to play. So it's even more obvious than like looking at a panpsychist view of little particles, which who knows, maybe they all do the same thing, but the consciousness kind of comes together. This is like, no, it's not even that. It's that they're actually doing different things. And now we got to get all these things together because we know that you and I do these all together. We all have them unified. So that's really
Yeah.
cool, man. It's like such an amazing take on like the binding problem and the unity problem and the combination problem. It's so good. It's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not to say that, functionalists can't kind of work out responses or whatever, but I'm just sort of thinking about, okay, what's a theory that can kind of make the most sense in the easiest sort of
Yeah.
way? And earlier I talked about explaining the known in terms of the
Yeah.
known. I agree with that. It's just, I think it's part of what I
Yeah.
know that I have a
Yeah.
perspective and that I have a unification of my perspective. I think that's part of what I know.
Yeah.
And so instead of positing, everything kind of flips in my mind, because I think, wait a second, why do I need to posit things outside my conscious awareness that I don't even know exists
Right.
in order to explain something that I can explain in terms of what I do
Yeah.
know exists, namely conscious awareness, which binds the elements.
Yeah.
So that's where I think I am real. You only get this from the first person, right? You're aware of
Mhm.
yourself, having thoughts and feelings. That first person data, if that's real, then I can use that to fill out my theory.
Yeah.
And it's not to say, just to be clear, it's not to say that there aren't functions, that there aren't also brain things or whatever like that. It's just to say that I don't need to posit more invisible, unnecessary
Yeah.
stuff to explain the unity of consciousness.
Yeah.
I don't need to do that. I
Yeah.
don't need to even posit some mysterious pattern uh, that's supposed to bind it all together, when I already think that I know what binds it together in my first person awareness. I'm aware of a field of awareness that binds together the different elements. I'm aware of myself as the binder of the different perspectives that I have over time,
Yeah.
or so I would argue. And I don't want to overstate this. There
Right.
are objections and replies, but I'm convinced by that. I mean, so I think you can sort of hear the passion in my voice, because this is one of those things where I didn't used to have this view, and then I took these courses, went deeper, deeper, deeper into the topics, and it convinced me. It's like, oh, wait a second, I have consciousness. It's real. It actually is real.
Yeah.
And it's not analyzable in terms of the things that might cause it or give rise to it.
Mhm.
It's not the same thing as that. Just like I'm not analyzable in terms of my parents.
Yeah.
Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
my parents maybe gave rise to
Yeah.
me, or at least my bodily form, but it would be a mistake to say that, I'm nothing but, my parents and their activities, the patterns of my parents. That's me. No. That's not
That's it.
a correct
It's
inference.
funny that you said that. I've thought this before about, like, my dad, and I'm like, are all of us just like slivers off of him?" And it's like, "Yeah, but then he would be a sliver off of his dad." Like, and, you get to consciousness. That's why I love studying it so much. Because, like, no, because I can't have his thoughts. I don't think his thoughts. And so I am different than him, even if I'm, like, super related to him and, all that stuff. But
I know what you mean.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, oh man, this is so good. I I totally
So
lost where I was
cup.
going, but yeah. Yeah, so are we done with Unity, or do you have more to say on that?
There's always more to say, but I would say that
Yeah,
that's probably enough just to kind of give a taste of it.
yeah.
That
Josh,
merely explaining how you get consciousness is
yeah,
not going to explain the unity of
yeah.
consciousness. So
Okay,
yeah, please go
so
on.
the first time you came on, you helped me with thinking about facts, and I saw another analog here maybe, and maybe I'm mistaken, but I had this problem because I was studying facts, and certain philosophers are like, everything is a fact. There's no substances really, because think of like look at this ball, and this ball is just, it's a red ball, and that's a fact, and it's a instance of this property, and really it's just facts all the way down. And I had this really hard time with that, and you were helping me think through, like, no, there still has to be a substance, ordered in a certain way, and we talked about facts and stuff like
Uh-huh.
that. And
Right.
I kind of see something
The
similar.
parts of the fact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I kinda see something similar play out here, where it's like everything's computation or everything's pattern, and you're like, "Well, no, you still need something there to be patterned, to like
Yeah.
to be to you don't get the pattern without the thing in there."
I agree with that.
Okay,
Yeah. It's a nice connection
nice.
there. Yeah. Patterns are made up of nodes. And then what are the nodes?
Yes. Oh, that's good.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
And the nodes could be mindless
Sure.
parts of a mind.
Yeah.
Listen to that. Because if the question is what's fundamental, and if mind is fundamental, mind can give rise to mindless nodes in a network.
That
Why not?
yeah,
I mean,
the unicorn right in my head, I don't think it has a
it
mind.
has no mind.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's in a mind, but doesn't have a
Right.
mind. These are one of those distinctions, right? Like everything might be in mind. It doesn't mean everything has
Right.
mind. So that's
That's
important,
good.
right? Because sometimes people have this sort of worry, like, what are you saying, Josh? Are you saying rocks have a mind? It's like, no, no. My view is that rocks are mindless, just as images are mindless.
Mm,
But that doesn't mean that images don't arise within a mind.
right.
Or that rocks aren't formed out of more basic conscious beings, right? I mean,
Right, right,
there's
right.
different ways we can think about that,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, so how about P? Do we have a little bit of time to go to the powers?
yeah. Let's do it. So powers. So just to kind of review again, kind of for the audience, we have cup contains the challenges of explaining conscious beings, and there are many different challenges under each of those letters, but I've highlighted one for each. So under the C, we're looking at how the qualitative aspects of consciousness could be functions. We're focusing on functions or patterns or computations. And the suggestion is that there's more to consciousness than merely the relations and the computations and the network. And then the U has to do with the unities of consciousness. So, in addition to the qualitative aspect of consciousness, I think we need to understand how consciousness gets unified into a single perspective. And I don't think function on its own is going to account for that, even though I do think that uh, function is part of that, if that makes
Yep.
sense, because I do think that unities of consciousness play a functional role, just as the shape of a key plays a functional role.
Mhm.
So if I have a certain unified consciousness, that's going to enable me to have certain, relationships, certain behaviors, and certain behaviors in my brain are going to help enable certain unities of consciousness. So I want to make sure that that's emphasized. I do think that brain activity enables and opens up the possibilities of certain types of consciousness, and that's
Yeah.
important, even if the consciousness is not the same thing as the mere pattern and function.
Right.
Okay, so then we have P for the powers of consciousness, and here this is based on that causal exclusion problem that we talked about briefly, which is the problem of understanding how it is that you could consciously do anything if mindless unconscious bits of reality do
Right.
everything. So a way of sort of thinking about this is go back to that waterfall. Imagine that the waterfall is made out of little atoms, and then those atoms are the fundamental actors in the motion of the waterfall. So we experience the waterfall as a macro level splashy sort of reality,
Yeah.
but that macro level splashy reality is wholly explained and determined by the micro level particles outside of our direct
Yeah.
experience. Okay. So those particles are, you might say, the puppet masters of the
Mhm.
waterfall. Okay, so far so good. But now the problem is that if we are able to do anything consciously, then the challenge is to understand how we do something consciously if the mindless bits of reality are the puppet masters. They pull all the
Right.
strings.
Yeah.
The functionalist or patternist or computationalist, those views don't answer that problem. It's not that one couldn't be a computationalist and adopt certain solutions. It's that those views aren't themselves solutions, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. So if all that you're thinking is a pattern of particles, and earlier I said maybe we can solve it by sort of reducing your thoughts to physical stuff, but that does not solve the problem of how the micro physical, the smallest things, could be the puppet master of the macro
It
stuff.
might seem to, in my head, it exacerbates that problem actually by wanting to reduce to the physical. It's like, well, it's like the argument from Reason, C.S. Lewis and others, where it's like it doesn't look like the laws of physics are going to do the work of the laws of thought or of following a chain of inference. That looks like a different type of thing than yeah, physics or microphysics or whatever, wherever we're going, quantum physics looks like it might be different than a chain of reasoning.
This is Hasker's point as well. And even if you do reduce the chain of reasoning to a macro physical
Yeah.
state, as long as the micro parts of that state are the fundamental movers and explainers of the macro
Right.
state, then the reasoning itself isn't doing any causal work
Yeah.
of its own.
Yeah.
And so this is Jaegwon Kim's causal exclusion problem, which is the problem of understanding how it could possibly be that mental activity could do any causal work.
Mm.
How it is that if you intend to write a letter, that could make any difference to your body, leading you to actually writing that letter.
Right.
How does that actually work?
Yeah.
And merely reducing the intention to a macro physical state still doesn't solve the problem if the micro mindless states are really still the puppet
Yeah.
master, really pulling all the strings. And it is very interesting because some philosophers have argued that mental causation for this very reason is sort of
Mm.
epiphenomenal. It's not really there. It's not really real. It's like really what's going on is the microphysical stuff is doing all the work, kind of creating the illusion
Yeah.
that the mental stuff is actually doing something, that you are actually doing something. It's kind of an illusion.
Mhm.
And that sort of illusionist idea actually makes a lot of sense to me from this sort of mindless first view,
Yeah.
where the mindless pulls all the
Yeah.
strings, right?
You'd mentioned in dealing with, I believe it was epiphenomenalism, there's like a real quick self-defeat argument, which may not fully do it. I think this is what you were making reference to, but it's like somewhere still in the vicinity is like, hey, if I'm being convinced and you're showing me reasons for epiphenomenalism, it looks like I lose my reason to hold to epiphenomenalism once I affirm it.
This is Hasker. He's got an argument like this.
Yeah.
I don't recall if it's exactly a circularity argument, but you could probably turn it into that.
Yeah.
What he says is that if reasoning doesn't have a causal impact,
Hmm.
then you can't actually trust that you arrived at the conclusion on the basis of reasoning.
Right.
I mean, literally, all your beliefs are irrational because they're not on the basis of
Yeah.
reasoning. The reasoning is itself is just an epiphenomenon of the
Yeah.
mindless motion.
Yeah.
Um, and one kind of argument, in addition to this kind of self-defeat argument, because you could say, hey, you know what, that's fine, I didn't arrive at this on the basis of reason fundamentally, it's on the basis of the mindless, but maybe the mindless sort of helps me to survive
Yeah.
through evolution.
Yeah.
And so this is that sort of pragmatist idea that,
Hmm.
as long as it sort of is useful, sort of functions as if I'm reasoning, that'll help me to survive. But it's kind of interesting because some philosophers actually have made an argument from evolutionary biology to mental
Hmm.
causation. And the argument there is that the reasoning, the mental stuff, won't help you survive if it doesn't literally make any causal
Right.
impact at
Right.
all. It shouldn't even be
Right.
relevant to your survival at all. So there's no reason why there'd be any kind of like meaningful sequences of thought where you follow an argument to a
Yeah.
conclusion for a long time, or like read a book and like follow it for a long time. That sequence, there's no reason for it ever to have any kind of meaningful coherence. It's because it has no causal
Yeah.
impact. That the only way that there would be, in fact, this sort of rise of minds that are rational through evolutionary processes is if rational thinking makes a causal
Right.
difference. It can contribute to survival.
Yeah.
This is an argument that I believe Millikan
Hmm.
makes. I remember seeing him give a talk on this, and he's not a friend of mind first theories, by the
Yeah.
way. But he makes this argument for mental causation. See, I just think let's go ahead and make that argument. It does seem convincing. Now let's add Jaegwon Kim's
Hmm.
analysis of mental
Yeah.
causation, that it would be causally excluded if the a different kind of reality were more fundamental, mindless reality. Let's say this is the general structure of his argument. I understand that part of his solution, Jaegwon Kim's solution in his book, is to give a kind of reductive analysis of the mental
Yeah.
causes, and then a non-reductive analysis of the qualitative
Hmm.
aspects of consciousness.
Yeah.
But but then other philosophers say, but no, it's the qualitative aspects of the mental that is part of the causal
Right.
chain in reasoning. There's a qualitative aspect to reasoning that's part of it, and that's only meaningful if that has a causal impact. And so therefore, this is going to be a problem unless mind is somehow prior to the
Yeah.
mindless.
Yeah. The nomological danglers are still troublesome. I think everyone always says top down, bottom up causation. So like if you're a epiphenomenalist, you got like bottom up causation, but you don't have any top down. For so you got a physical box and you got a mental box up here, and it goes one way. But interactionists want to say it's both ways. But if you're mind first, it should probably be mind down here, right, and then physical up
That's
there.
it.
I actually like
Yeah,
that.
that was the flip in my own mind, my own thinking, even as I was writing the book, because I used to think, well, yeah, I guess there's evidence for top-down mental
Yeah.
causation. And then as I this that kind of happened to me as I was reading more of the science
Mm,
side, theorists talking about kind of the nature of matter itself,
right.
and it was like, oh, okay, maybe we're deeper in than I thought. And then all of a sudden I realized, oh, it could be bottom up. Like the mind is the foundational. My mind is foundational to even my own functioning
Yeah.
brain, and I'm not an aftermath product of my brain. It really is literally the other way, that my brain emerges out of prior
Oh
mentality.
man, it's so good.
And my own mentality, it's not just like positing God out there.
Right.
It's
Right.
my own
Yeah.
mentality is giving rise to the activities of the brain, maybe in coordination with other prior
Yeah.
arrangements, but
Yeah.
you can fill it in different ways,
Well,
right? But yeah, the mind is prior.
that brings up something that I've been meaning to ask about, like functionalism and patternism and the powers of consciousness, and it has to do with like dispositions. So like we through our actions over time, it seems like we do kind of form ourselves into a pattern, or we have certain dispositions to act or even to think certain ways. And I think that's something we could affirm with the patternist, that like yes, there is this deep integral pattern that I've kind of shaped myself into. I still have to be something to be shaped into that. I can't just be shaped without
Yes.
a thing to be shaped. But I do have these like dispositions to act, and I think even mentally, mental acts, thinking. But I'm not just that shape, and I'm not just my thoughts. And you mentioned that in the book, that you are not your thoughts, and I thought that was so good. Um, it's something that I worry about a lot, because I think like I like my thoughts. I kind of obsess over them. Actually, I do a lot of videos on journaling. I have like lots of journals here in front of me, and if you look back here, I have a bunch there. And this is an identity disc from Tron, and it kind of helps me like that's an external mind type thing to capture your thoughts, because I don't. They're not all occurrent to me, and that kind of drives
Yeah.
me bonkers, because I wish that they were. I hate forgetting things.
Yeah.
What's the relation? Do you, do you think that we can like do we shape our you say soul, but you also say conscious substance. is it shaped by our thoughts, or are just can we dispose ourselves to think certain things? What do you think?
I think so, yeah. We can have effects on our own selves as we form our intentions. Our minds make a
Yeah.
difference. There's a lot of empirical research that the way that you think will affect the health of your brain.
Yeah.
My sister, she's a therapist. She tells me some of the things that she uses to help people, and a lot of it is inner work. It's like work inside your mind,
Mm,
and you assign new meanings. You bring up memories. You think through that, and all of that is first of all real, and something that you have some control over. And as you
mm,
manage that, as you move it around in your mind, yeah, absolutely. I think you're shaping yourself in a
yeah.
sense. Um, yeah.
I like that. I really like that because I think that is something that the patternists kind of get right there. Um, well,
Yes.
I wanna
Agreed.
jump all over the cup. So, like, the contents of consciousness, like, um, what do you do with non-occurrent thoughts? I if you look at my notes, you might think I'm insane because I write the same thing over, and I'll write an entry, and then I'll put a square
Mhm.
around it. That's what this entry is about, and then I go through and I work through it, but I make the same ones over and over, partially because I just don't want that thing to leave me forever. It's not
Yeah.
what do you do with those? Are they in your, realm of consciousness, but you have to access them back into there, or what do we do?
I'm not so sure. I mean, so I've been thinking about this myself in terms of how we can maybe create access to
Yeah,
thoughts. And I like your example of like the books, because the books are things that take the form of shapes, basically. It's
yeah,
like configurations of shape. And those configurations are very important for us because they allow us to then access certain states of consciousness, certain
yeah,
thoughts, for example.
yeah.
And I mean, I actually think this is precisely what the brain is. I mean, the
Dude,
brain is
yeah,
a device for accessing states of
I think that's
consciousness.
right.
But this is the reason for the brain is for us to be able to access certain states of consciousness in relation to this environment that we're
Mhm.
in. Because people sometimes ask me, like, what's the point of a brain if consciousness isn't reducible to brain activity? It's like, okay, well, what's the point of a book if consciousness isn't reducible to books?
Yeah,
What's the point of a book if a book is not conscious?
yeah,
A book doesn't have to be conscious for a book to have a very important role for conscious beings.
mhm,
A brain doesn't have to itself be conscious for a brain to have a very vitally important role for conscious beings. This is why when the brain is damaged, it's going to affect your access to conscious
right,
states. Just like if a book is damaged, it'll affect your access
yeah,
to conscious
yeah,
states. It's the same thing. And so I guess I get passionate about this too, because I think sometimes people will have kind of a barrier to recognizing the first person
mhm,
reality of thoughts and consciousness. So everything gets reduced to something that's outside your own awareness, a brain, which people usually have not seen their own
yeah,
brain, but they posit that they have a brain. So they're not even aware of it. So the thing that they are aware of, their own feelings and emotions, the thing that should be even clearest to them,
hmm,
sometimes gets analyzed in terms of what's less clear to them. And one of my kind of passions and principles as a philosopher is to actually let the clear be the light that shines on the steps into the
yeah,
unclear, so that you actually let the clearest things give you information about the other things. So this is where I say your thoughts are real, your consciousness is real. You have a brain, your brain has a purpose. It's deeply important for consciousness, just as books are important for consciousness. And I'm not saying this analogy between brains and books captures
right.
everything, um, because you might say, hey, you know what? I don't know of any conscious thing that doesn't have a brain, but I do know of conscious things that don't have a book. Right. So there's those
Yeah,
differences,
yeah,
right? But I would say a reason that um, conscious beings have brains is because brains are devices that facilitate the specific kinds of conscious experiences in this world.
yeah,
So, I mean, look, even a universal being like God, the greatest mind, is utilizing the universe
mm.
to facilitate conscious connection with us.
No,
And
that's a good
the
point, man.
universe
That's a really good
looks like
point.
a brain. You could think of the universe like a brain. So I have no problem saying every conscious being has a brain.
Hmm,
I don't need to argue against that. People are like, Josh, you believe in, mind independent, beings that can exist outside of outside of any brain, brain independent minds is what I meant to say. It's like, well, maybe every single conscious being works through configurations that you could call brains,
Mhm.
or in other words, every single conscious being works through something
Yeah, it doesn't have to
that
be
is itself
material,
not
right?
itself.
Yeah, it's because you brought up angels, which is I love to do too, and you're like, "Well, what about angels?" So, like, an angel could have, like, doesn't have to have a physical brain, right? Or would it?
Well, what do you mean by
Yeah, right,
physical here?
exactly, dude. Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Because I mean, I would say that if we understand physical in the way that many physicists are telling us about the nature of physics in terms of a quantum field, and many of them are saying that the quantum field itself, I mentioned Carlo Rovelli just because I know his work better than
Yeah.
others. He talks about the quantum field emerging out of informational states. And I love what he says. He says, information, I'm not sort of qualified to tell you what that is, like metaphysically, but here's how information functions.
Mm,
He'll give us the functional aspects of information,
yeah,
coming back to that.
yeah.
Um, but I think that the idea that the basic nature of the physical world is itself emergent out of information, which is grounded in mental
Ooh,
activity,
okay.
makes sense to me.
So that's like
So that even
IIT.
angels have
Yeah, that could
this
that's like I mean, you could appropriate some stuff of in
information integrated
yeah,
theory
yeah,
or integrated.
integrated information theory, yeah. Dude, that's pretty nice. Well, this is helpful too because, like I said, I just grabbed some journals that were off the floor, and there's just this I got a bunch of them. They're all over the place. But it's helpful for me. I think I totally agree with you about brains. So I think of like Andy Clark and Chalmers' external mind thesis about this notebook that a Alzheimer's patient had, and he used it to navigate the world. And if you destroy that, there might be kind of ethical issues where like you should be held responsible for destroying a part of him. And I've been chewing on that for a while, and I came to the conclusion that it's like it's not an external mind; it's an external brain. Your notebooks, when they function that way to help you help bring that thought back to your mind, it's functioning like another brain, but it's not another mind. You are your mind, right? So
Mhm.
that's good, man. I really like
Yeah.
that's actually super
Yeah. Or
helpful.
you have a mind. Depends on what you mean by mind there.
Right,
But
yeah, because
yeah,
if you're a substance,
totally
yeah,
with you.
and maybe it's a part of
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, inseparable part of your substance. There's all sorts of ways. Man, Josh, this is awesome. This cup stuff is huge, man. Thanks for breaking it here. This is
Yeah.
fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. The cup, I think it helps to organize the different challenges.
yeah,
And we talked about one sort of in each of those letters.
yeah,
In the book under C, I talk about the problem of constructing thoughts
mm,
and all the different aspects of thoughts. And there are different problems with constructing thoughts than with constructing
right,
feelings.
right.
Different problems with constructing intentions. I also have a chapter on your intrinsic value
Mm,
and even what that means.
yeah.
So there are many things that I would say go into just the C. And then you got the U, which I'm glad we could talk about that, the unities of consciousness, the powers of consciousness. So I'm glad I could sort of experiment with using that
Yeah,
acronym with you, because I think that it would be helpful to have all these different problems organized in a way so that people, when they think of the hard problem, they understand that's not the only problem. That's like one part of the C.
yeah,
That's one part of the C. That's the challenge of explaining consciousness in general, using a logical deduction from physical
mm.
stuff. That's one specific problem that doesn't even address how you explain all the different other contents of consciousness, thoughts, intentions, those other ones, or the unities, or the
Yeah,
powers. And if we can sort of think of all of these wrapped up into the one challenge that everybody from every perspective faces, which is the construction challenge of constructing a conscious
mhm,
being, and to realize that everybody, it's not that this is like a weapon against
yeah,
materialists or physicalists or mindless first. In
mm,
fact, my own view, I don't know if you got to the chapters yet where I talk about my own kind of materialist physicalist
mm,
account,
yeah,
my account,
mm,
where it's about filling out the nature of matter. So it's still a mind first account, but it fits very, very well with empirical science and with what a lot of physicalists say
yeah,
about what they mean by physicalism. So I think it's just so important that everybody, no matter what their viewpoint is, has this challenge, and I think can then learn
yes,
about the nature of who we are just by wrestling with the
yeah.
challenge.
I love that. I think that's I don't know. It's hard to make like universal claims. I think that's a really good way maybe the most important way, maybe the best way to do philosophy, because it's kind of inviting people in and you kind of poke holes, but you poke holes, one, because it's fun, and two, because it helps you understand. And then they come back at you and you're like, oh, that is weird. Yeah, that's weird. Maybe I have to bite that bullet, or maybe not. But will you have to bite this bullet too? Okay, that's fascinating. And you're just kind of learning together.
That's it.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
And it's not just
yeah,
kumbaya because you're
yeah,
still poking holes, but it's doing
yeah.
it for each other's benefit, and because it's like, this is
Yeah, I love
strange.
you, so I'm gonna poke a hole in your view.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
That's right, man. I love that.
It's I always tell people the love language for
Yeah,
philosophers is arguing
yeah,
with each others.
yeah.
Yeah.
Josh, can I get I need like a little clip, a little, juicy tidbit here. Do you think that the AI folks can construct a conscious substance, or is that something that, um, is reserved maybe for God?
I think that the AI folk cannot, just by assembling
Hmm,
computer chips into a certain functional array,
yeah,
construct a conscious substance. That on its own will not be enough.
okay.
It could be that fundamental reality has installed certain laws
Yeah,
so that if we enter into certain functional patterns or states, that will open up the opportunity for an already existing conscious form to take a new
yeah.
form and maybe to manifest into our world.
That's good, man. That's yeah, Brian Cutter, Kenny Boyce, they got me with that too, that the psychophysical laws, if there are some, then they could be that could happen. All right, man. This has been so good. I'll drop links to all your stuff. People, they're gonna know where to find you, but I will put all Josh's links in there as well. Dude, thanks so much for all your time and thanks for your work. This book,
Thank
thanks for
you.
the book. The book's amazing. Um, amazing, dude. This was so much fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been, yeah, so much fun.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
All right, folks. That's gonna have to do it for now. This has been Parker's Pensées, and as always, all glory to God.